All right, last installment, hopefully shorter than 15 minutes. But you can always watch this, on QuickTime. So the big question comes down to like, how can we produce food in a more sustainable way? Um, Using our resources. So we need to increase our efficiency. We need to decrease the effects of industrialized food production, and that has to be intentional. And then eliminate government subsidies that promote such harmful impacts. So we can't just be throwing money after techniques that we know now are harmful to the environment. There's a responsibility that we have as a government to shift when we get information, not just to keep doing the same thing. So it is not a popular view sometimes, that even in the media. So um, number one, though, we need to conserve topsoil. Soil conservation techniques can include things like terracing, contour planting, strip cropping with crop cover, alley cropping, agroforestry, meaning like growing things within trees so there's shade, windbreaks or shelter belts, and then conservation tillage, which is uh, a really shifted mindset in terms of farming. We need to understand that erosion happens in certain places, and if erosion is happening on large scale, then there needs to be more intensive responses within those areas. So here are some of those examples of terracing, intercropping, um, and making wind shelters down there on the right bottom corner. This is definitely something that you don't necessarily see if you're driving through an area, but if you are flying over an area, you can begin to see some of this taking place. So terracing is actually a really old practice traditionally, but it does allow us to use um, land that's not super flat. Um, and so there's things that we need to think about in terms of our methodologies and ways to change that. We need to restore soil fertility. So that means using organic fertilizers, green manure, compost, animal manure. We need to be careful about manufactured inorganic fertilizers, but we can add them. We just need to do it in a way that's like we actually test first, and then restore what's needed in the soil. Biochar, crop rotation, these are all ways that can restore soil fertility. Now, we learned about biochar. We know that it's not something that fixes something for a long time, but anyhow, reduced soil salinization and desertification. Soil salinization is more costly in terms of solutions. It's better to prevent, but having to remediate soil that has been salinized is difficult because it means typically you're going to need to be flooding that area with a lot of water that's fresh, and then the water won't be so fresh anymore, but trying to get it to leach out. And sometimes it just means that it has to sit there for a while, or using crops that will pull salt out of the soil. Desertification, we have in order to like regrow, there definitely needs to be we need to reduce deforestation, and we need to go back in, and it's programs that will do tree plants and that will anchor the topsoil and will reintroduce plants into the area that need to remediate that back into like a healthy, whether it's a grassland or a forest or whatever it is. We have seen success with this methodology in recent years, and so they're anecdotal, but there's been like little case studies here and there where we've seen replanting really take off, and we can see the effects of it, that it is actually really effective. So like I said, prevention is better with soil salinization. So reducing irrigation, using more effective irrigation methods, and switching to salt tolerant crops are all ways that we can kind of offset. And then, like I said, the cleanup is really expensive. Um, and, not using your land for 2 to 5 years is expensive. That's not something that people necessarily go to right away. Um, so, another way to reduce our impact is to consume meat and dairy products in a more sustainable way. So, less forms of animal protein, like instead of your meals being all centered around an animal protein is kind of like the side. It's like an additional piece, but really like taking meals that are based on plant proteins and using those. Reduce or eliminate meat intake. Using insects as a source of protein. It sounds crazy, but there's lots of societies that actually do this already. Um, Here we go. Um, So just looking at the number of calories that come from each of those industries will kind of give you an idea of where we put all of our effort. Um, so things, to think about: eating, like we say, like eating lower on the food chain. Beef production is very damaging to the environment. Um, Aquaculture. How do we offset those damages? Aquaculture Stewardship Council has developed sustainability standards, and they certify 4.6% of the world's aquaculture operations. That's not very many. So, open ocean aquaculture, recirculating aquaculture, where water is continually recycled, or polyaquaculture. Those are examples of more effective ways. So, not keeping the animals in pens and net pens, using water that's continually recycled so that it's not getting filled up with diseases and wastes. But it does take a in a development in technologies. It takes a bigger investment of infrastructure that way. So any kind of change, there's going to be a cost, but the cost really has always been there. It's just that we're shifting it from damage on the ecosystem to restoring ecosystems. More solutions, more sustainable aquaculture, protect mangroves and estuaries. They improve management of wastes, will reduce the escape of aquaculture species into the wild, because one of the threats is that if you're raising something that should not live in that particular ocean environment, letting it escape in that ocean environment is detrimental. Set up self-sustaining polyaquaculture systems that will combine plants, fish, and shellfish, so that it's not just a monoculture. And then making sure that, if you are going to be buying farmed fish, that it's coming from sustainable means. One of the ways that we can do some good is to expand organic agriculture. Benefits of organic farming is that it does actually build soil matter, reduces erosion, it reduces water pollution, it does use less fossil fuels, cuts greenhouse energy emissions. It can match conventional yields, though they are more expensive, and they're more weed tolerant. Crops compare favorably throughout drought years. It is more profitable, though, because of the cost that people know they're going to pay more for organic, and if they know that this is important, they're willing to invest in that. Components of sustainable agriculture that will help us shift to more sustainable food production are, in the future, we're going to rely more on organic polyculture and less on conventional monoculture. We need to grow crops that are perennial, meaning they are not annual. There's not having to be tillage. It's like you don't have to have the seeds. It's something that will grow year after year after year. We need to learn to rely on more renewable energy sources to power our farms and our agricultural systems, and then tailor fertilizers to the different conditions that are there to minimize the amount of runoff that is, instead of just like, oh, we don't have enough nitrogen, now we just put all this nitrogen there. Then it's like we have all this waste that's going into the waterways. Plus, on top of that, we need to irrigate more efficiently, so that drip irrigation and more concentrated irrigation practices are being used. So what can you do? More sustainable food production is going to be supported by eating less meat, by choosing fish that aren't secondary consumers, choosing herbivore fish, using organic farming that you would grow and supplement your food supply by what you grow at home, by certified organic foods. Eat things that are locally grown. So check where your food is actually coming from. It's better to buy something that's grown in the US. It's better to buy something that's grown locally in California or isn't traveling very far. Compost your food wastes, cut your food wastes, eat, what you need, and don't overeat. Government policies have controlled food prices and provided subsidies for a lot of times in a lot of countries where there hasn't been enough. New Zealand and Brazil have ended farm subsidies successfully. We still have subsidies in place, and so when science is saying we should do this, but the government money is still going to something that we shouldn't be doing, then we're kind of working really, like, there's a conflict of interest there. Government and private programs that target poverty can improve food security. They can give low interest loans. They can give immunizations or give vitamins um, supplements and things for children so that they can stay healthy. And so there are a lot of ways in which things can change. It's just getting governments to actually look proactively at these policies and try to see them move into the pipeline. Like I talked about, eat locally grown foods and cut your food waste. What does that look like? Going to the farmer's market, receiving a box of produce on a regular basis that's a seasonal thing that's coming from somewhere local. That will support local economies and farm families. And yeah, it might be a little bit more cost, but you are investing in a change. Much food waste occurs in restaurants, homes, and supermarkets. And so uh, just knowing, like, buying what you need is buying in smaller amounts, going maybe to the supermarket more often so that you don't have high food waste. So here's just a picture of a local garden. And there's a lot of food that can actually come out of a small plot of land. It's pretty amazing. Um, Trade offs and challenges. Challenges is that on the demand side, we do have a growing population, and people are often moving up the food chain, and like we can turn food into biofuel, but that's not, there's some challenges to that. On the supply side, um, we get a lot of soil erosion, depletion of aquifers, stagnant grain yields, and rising temperatures because of the production of food itself. So we know that we have like we have to find a balance between what the demand is like putting on. I mean, people moving up the food chain, you get these like keto is like the new hot thing, right? And like I've been delved into it because it's like I know that we see trends, like people are eating a lot more seafood, but that puts a demand on the environment, and the supply puts a demand on the environment. We need to be aware of that and mitigate those things. In terms of the solutions for those challenges on the demand side, stabilizing population, eradicating poverty. I mean, I think that that's the biggest one. We know that in order to stabilize population, you have to create systems that make people understand that like they have social security and they have a higher education, and that naturally people would choose to have fewer children, and that we can kind of shrink our society um, in a way that's intentional and effective. Reduce excessive meat consumption, eliminate biofuel subsidies. Um, supply sides On the supply side, we must protect our soil, we must protect our water, and we have to find ways that we can farm more efficiently that are not going to destabilize the climate. All right. There are 700 at this point 795 million people that have health problems because they don't get enough to eat, and 2.1 billion people face health problems from eating too much. Modernized industrial agriculture has a greater impact on the environment than any other human activity, but there are solutions. We just can't ignore this as a problem, and as a society, it's something that we need solutions oriented leaders, and maybe that's you. More sustainable forms of food production will help offset the harmful effects of the industrialized food production systems. So, tie it all together, we have to transition as a society, whether it's using more solar energy, whether it's focusing on topsoil, whether it's making sure that we are using our wastes in a way that we're just recycling it right back in, greater crop variety. But we need to like tie in all of these solutions. There isn't just one solution that's going to work. It's a collection of solutions, and it's definitely an intentional look at this particular system. When systems are allowed to just grow unchecked, there's often going to be something negative that it brings to society. And we're at that point in history where we're looking at the production of food, and that as a system has a lot of consequences that we just can't allow to continue to happen as a society. We have to interrupt that with solutions. So that's chapter 12. There's a lot to chew on there. Anyhow, I guess I got it under 15 minutes. I hope that you watched this on fast forward. Have a great day, you guys.